Hi, this is John Finch with Able United. Sorry for the technical difficulties we're having. Uh, we're going to go ahead and move forward. My name is John Finch. I'm the director of Able United. Hopefully we'll be having Ken Brown join us here shortly. He is with the Social Security Administration and will be doing the bulk of the presentation regarding Social Security and how it impacts Able accounts. Um, Everybody is in listen mode. If you have questions, the best way to answer it is through the How to Ask Questions box on the GoToWebinar panel. There will be some designated time to answer everybody's questions at the end. If your question is not answered, we'll reach out to you individually to make sure that we answer all your questions. Also, you'll notice that above that, there's some handouts you can download, such as our presentation for today, as well as Able United's program description and participation agreement. The goal of today's webinar is to provide a quick overview of the ABLE Act and Able United specifics. If this is your first time hearing about ABLE, I encourage you to visit our website, ableunited.com, to learn more about the ABLE Act and how and Able United specifically. You can also view testimonials, stay up to date on ABLE through our news blog feature, find previously recorded webinars, and download our program description and participation agreement. Ken will speak on the distinctions between Social Security Administration or SSA disability programs. He will also highlight program rules for ABLE account holders who receive Supplemental Security Income, SSI. Also, Ken will cover on what states will be reporting to SSA, and finally, the next steps that the administration will take in implementing and collecting ABLE account data. Before we begin, I would like to conduct a quick poll to see everybody's general knowledge of ABLE accounts. This is going to help us in marketing and also for future webinars. So if everybody could take one moment and answer this quick poll. Thank you all for joining. Give me 1 second while I add Ken Brown to our panels here. Thank you, Ken, for joining. Hopefully you can now hear us. All right, let's close the poll and move on. Thank you all for participating in that poll. That will help us. All right, so what is ABLE? ABLE stands for Achieving a Better Life Experience. The Stephen Beck Jr. ABLE Act was enacted in December of 2014 and encourages individuals with disabilities to save private funds, and that's after-tax funds, to support health, independence, and a quality of life. It added a new section to the Internal Revenue Code, Section 529A, and enjoys the same tax benefits 529 college savings plans offer, with some additional unique benefits specifically for individuals with disabilities. In July of 2015, Florida created Florida ABLE Inc. It's a nonprofit and direct support organization of the Florida Prepaid College Board, and charged them to create and administer Florida ABLE's program, which is called Able United. Able United launched in July of last year. So we're going to cover some overall Able United Act qualifications and then go into Able United specifics. ABLE accounts are tax-free savings and investment accounts established to support disability expenses and to do so while maintaining government benefits. There are 3 eligibility requirements for Able United. First, the individual with a disability must be a Florida resident at time of application. When ABLE first passed, it required each state to set up their own ABLE program exclusively for their residents. However, this changed in December 2015 and amended this language to allow states to open residency to anybody they choose. At this time, Florida has decided to only allow Florida residents at time of application to enroll. Currently, there are 18 other ABLE programs up and running, and most offer national enrollment. So if you're listening and you, your loved one, or the individual you care for that has a disability does not currently reside in Florida, you can visit the ABLE National Resource Center, or www.ablenrc.org, ablenrc.org, to find a detailed list of other ABLE programs. The next 2 requirements are true for all ABLE programs as prescribed in the Internal Revenue Code. First, the individual has to have a qualifying disability. A qualifying disability means an individual who is entitled to benefits based on blindness or disability under Title II or Social Security Disability Insurance, which is an earned program based on work history, or Title 16 of the Social Security Act, supplemental security income. Ken will go more into detail on both of these programs. If an individual with a disability is not currently receiving one of these benefits, they can qualify based on self-certification. And they're stating that they meet the marked and severe functional limitation standard of disability in the Social Security Act for children claiming benefits under the Supplemental Security Income Program, but without regard to the age of the individual. Additionally, the disability is expected to last at least 12 months or result in death. The Treasury Department and the IRS have concluded that a certification under penalties of perjury that the individual or the individual's agent under a power of attorney or parent, legal guardian, has a signed physician's diagnosis, and that the signed diagnosis will be retained and provided to the ABLE program or the IRS upon request. This self-certification under penalties of perjury is adequate to satisfy this disability requirement. And finally, the last requirement is that the disability had to occur before age 26. You can visit our website, ableunited.com, for a short eligibility wizard that can help you determine your eligibility. Now let's look at more detailed specifics on how to open an Able United account. Our program, and most all of the programs, are completely, enrollment is completely done online on our website. It takes about 15 minutes to set up. There are no documents to upload. You would enter some identifying information about the individual with the disability, categorize and self-certify basis of eligibility, and select your investment options. If another individual is opening the account on your behalf, such as a parent, legal guardian, or someone who has the power of attorney for an individual's ABLE account or finances, they will need to identify who they are. Individuals self-certifying under penalties of perjury, stating that they meet the disability eligibility requirements, will also need to provide a date of diagnosis and physician contact information. After an account is open, an individual, their friends and family, or even an organization can contribute to the ABLE account electronically or through ACH or check. Up to $14,000 can be contributed from all sources per calendar year. So for example, if Ken decides to donate $5,000 to your ABLE account, thank you, Ken, for your generosity, and I can contribute $4,000. The most you can be contributed to that ABLE account for the rest of the calendar year is $5,000. So that's $14,000 from all sources per calendar year. When enrolling in Able United, you will need to select how you like to grow your funds. We have 7 different investment options to meet the needs of most investors. We have 3 pre-designed portfolios, a conservative, moderate, and growth. And these are made up of 4 underlying investment options. A money market account, which is our Florida Prime account. It's a local government surplus funds trust fund for Florida, where Florida agencies as well as 800 plus municipalities around the state use for low returns, but a less risky option. We have a U.S. stock option and a U.S. bond option managed by Vanguard, and an international stock option which is managed by BlackRock. Individuals can invest in one or all of these options based on their risk tolerance. Finally, how do you get the funds out of the Able United account? You can withdraw the funds at any time and for any reason via ACH transfer to a checking or savings account, or you can request a check to be cut to either you, the individual with a disability, or to any third party. Generally, funds in or withdrawn from an ABLE account for qualified disability expenses, with some exceptions to those receiving SSI, and I think Ken's going to speak more about that, will not negatively impact your benefits. Ken's also going to talk a little bit more about what's considered a qualified disability expense. If there are withdrawals used for qualified disability expenses, the growth portion of that withdrawal is not subject to tax as long as you use it appropriately. Able United does not ask what the funds are being used for. However, the IRS might and want to know, and Social Security will be collecting data on withdrawals from those individuals receiving supplemental security income. So we recommend keeping receipts as well as an explanation of why it's a qualified disability expense. Once again, this was a quick highlight of ABLE accounts and some Able United specifics. Once again, you can visit our website, ableunited.com, for additional information. And I want to make sure, Ken, can you hear me?
I can hear you fine. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Wonderful, Ken. Thank you so much for joining. before I turn it right over to Ken, I just want to do another quick poll just to kind of get an idea of who's on the line. So if you could take 1 second and answer this quick poll on what best describes you, and then we'll get started. Great, we'll give everybody a couple more seconds to answer the poll, and then we will turn it over to Ken. Great, thank you everybody for participating. Ken, I'm going to try to turn this over to you. Let's hopefully it works. Let me see if that works. Can you control the slide?
A second here. I think
Push down or click. See if that works. There we go.
okay. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ken Brown. I work in the Office of Income Security Programs at the Social Security Administration headquarters in Baltimore. My team handles supplemental security income policy and eligibility, and we are responsible for the agency's regulations and implementing the ABLE program for Social Security programs, specifically the Supplemental Security Income Program. Today, I want to cover kind of several things, including distinctions between the Social Security disability programs. We have a number of different programs depending on whether it's an earned benefit or whether it's a means-tested disability benefit. Also covering the Supplemental Security Income Program rules and how the ABLE program plays into that. We'll be covering some of the state monthly reporting expectations and requirements, and then some of our next steps in implementation. Okay, under the Social Security program, well, the Social Security Administration runs several different programs. One is Title II, which you're probably most familiar with. Title II being the retirement program and also the earned disability program. And as I said, these are earned benefits. You pay your FICA taxes, and this is the coverage you earn as a result of those. There's several different benefits under Title II. The first disability benefit is the one that's probably the most common, and that's the monthly cash benefit for a disabled worker. And there you have to be under a disability, file an application, and then have disability insured status. That is, you've worked long enough and paid enough benefits into the program that you're entitled to disability benefits. Another benefit that you can earn is monthly cash benefits for a disabled widow or a disabled surviving divorced spouse. There, the individual has to be between ages 50 and 59 and meet the other requirement for entitlement to widows insurance benefits, and they also have to meet the same definition of disability as that for disabled workers. The third type of benefit under Title II is the monthly cash benefits for a disabled child. Although we don't, in the Title II program, we don't pay disabled benefits to children. The benefits here can start as early as age 18, but the individual must have been disabled before reaching age 22. So that's one way that you can be considered disabled to be entitled to an ABLE account. The other way is disability under Title 16 or the Supplemental Security Income Program, or SSI for short. The SSI program pays monthly cash benefits to age blind and disabled individuals, both adults and children, and it's means tested. So we look at the individual's income and the resources or the things that they own in determining whether they're eligible for benefits. Here, there's no insured status requirement, so you don't have to have a work history, you don't have to have paid FICA taxes. And we have different adult and child disability standards. If you're an adult and you're eligible for either Title II or Title 16 benefits from Social Security, you'd have to meet the adult disability standard. If you are using the certification process in order to become eligible for an ABLE account, that uses the childhood disability standard. So it's a slightly different definition of disability and does not include work history or ability to work under the child standard. Okay, what is the impact of having an ABLE account if you're receiving either Title II disability or SSI payments? Well, because Title II is not means tested, that is, there's not a financial test to see if you're eligible, having an ABLE account has no impact on your benefit at all. If you're an SSI recipient, and because it's means tested, the account balance and the distributions that you receive from an ABLE account are considered in determining your eligibility for SSI. And we'll talk a little bit about that in just a second. So the SSI program rules, we're going to talk about when we exclude ABLE account balances, contributions, and distributions, that is, when they don't affect eligibility. We're also going to look and see when those balances and distributions would count and have an impact on an individual's eligibility. We'll talk about suspension from eligibility when the ABLE account balance exceeds $100,000. And then we'll talk about special Medicaid rules that apply when somebody is suspended from SSI eligibility because of an ABLE account. Okay, for most federal means tested programs, the ABLE account balances are excluded in total. The limitation on the ABLE account is the maximum amount that could be contributed under a state plan. In some cases, in some states, that's between $400,000 and $500,000. John, do you?
Yeah, for ABLE United, our state is $418,000 is the maximum.
Okay, so $418,000. Now, if you're eligible for SSI benefits, we can exclude ABLE account balances up to $100,000. So you couldn't take full advantage of that $418,000 ability to contribute under the Florida ABLE program without having an impact on your SSI eligibility. So if you have over $100,000 in your ABLE account, any amounts over $100,000 count toward the $2,000 SSI resource limit. So if the balance of the ABLE account exceeds $100,000 by an amount that causes you to receive the resource limit, then you become ineligible for SSI. So that, say you had $103,000 in your ABLE account. If you take that $3,000, which is the amount that the account exceeds $100,000, and add it to your SSI resources, then you would be over the $2,000 limit, and you would be ineligible for SSI in that month. Okay, now what is the impact of that? Well, that means your SSI eligibility is suspended for that month. We put you into a special ABLE suspense category. So normally, if you're in suspension, you're not eligible for an SSI payment that month. And then if you stay in that suspended category, for 12 months, we would terminate your eligibility, and then you would have to apply all over again in order to be eligible for benefits. And generally, if you're ineligible for SSI, that is, you're in suspension, you're also ineligible for Medicaid, using SSI as your basis for eligibility for Medicaid. Now, under this special ABLE suspension period, we'll suspend your SSI benefit without time limit. Now, normally I said after 12 months you're terminated. If you're in ABLE suspension, that lasts for as long as you're suspended, as long as you remain otherwise eligible. Now, if other situations change. For example, you were to start working and earn too much money, if you left the country, something like that, you could be terminated and suspended for another reason. But if the only reason for your suspension is the excess amount in your ABLE account, you can be in that suspense category without time limit. And additionally, as long as you're in ABLE-only suspense, you would still be considered to be eligible for SSI for Medicaid eligibility purposes. So in most states, your Medicaid would continue even though you're not receiving that SSI payment. So that's a special provision for ABLE accounts that was passed with the ABLE statute. Now, how do we consider contributions to an ABLE account in the SSI program? Well, generally, contributions from any source to an ABLE account are not considered income to an SSI recipient. So whether the SSI recipient contributes money, whether their family contributes money, whether they have a rich uncle who wants to give them $10,000, if that amount is deposited directly into the ABLE account, it's not going to be counted as income and won't affect their SSI eligibility. Now, there are a couple exceptions. For example, if the SSI recipient is working and they were to direct deposit some of their earnings into the ABLE account, those amounts are still considered to be wages and we can be counted as wages even if they're deposited into the ABLE account. If somebody would like to make a gift to the individual to put into their ABLE account, if they give the money to the SSI recipient first for them to deposit into the ABLE account, we would consider that to be income because it went to the SSI recipient first instead of being made directly to an ABLE account. So the thing you have to remember here is if somebody wants to make a gift to the ABLE account, they have to deposit it directly into the ABLE account and not passing it through the SSI recipient. Now, on the other end of things, how do we consider distributions from an ABLE account? Now, you've been collecting up your money, you've got a balance in your ABLE account, and you have some expenses that you need to pay for. Any distribution from an ABLE account is not income to the designated beneficiary. And that doesn't matter if it's a qualified disability expense, whether it's a housing-related qualified disability expense, non-housing related qualified disability expense, or even if it's a non-qualified expense. It's not counted as income in the SSI program. Well, what is a qualified disability expense? According to the statute and the draft IRS regulations, they've laid out some examples of qualified disability expense, and that's expenses related to education, housing, transportation, employment training and support, assistive technology and related services, health, prevention and wellness, financial management and administrative services, legal fees, expenses for ABLE account oversight and monitoring, funeral and burial expenses, and also basic living expenses. Now, we have a special category of qualified disability expenses that was singled out in the statute for the SSI program, and that is the qualified disability expenses for housing. Okay. Now, when a distribution from an ABLE account may impact somebody's eligibility for SSI is if they've retained a distribution in the month beyond the month they've received it. So for example, it's near the end of March. If they got a distribution today and they still had that, and they deposited that into their bank account or into their checking account to pay a bill, if they still had that in their checking account on April the 1st, that would be considered to be a retained distribution. And that could affect their resources for the month of April. So it wouldn't count as income in the month of March when they received it, but if they retain it into the following month, it's a countable resource as of April the 1st if it's an unless it's a non-housing qualified disability expense. So we exclude from resources a distribution for a qualified disability expense other than housing if you retain it into the month beyond the month it's received. So as long as you're still eligible for your ABLE account, you can take a distribution for a qualified disability expense. It can go into your checking account and it can stay there until you pay that expense. You just have to be able to tell us, yes, this $500, I took it out in March, it's still in my checking account in April, and that it is for a qualified disability expense. So you have to be able to identify it in order for it to be excluded. Okay, now, as I said, there are two situations where we will count these retained distributions as a resource. If it's a qualified disability expense for housing, so you take out money today to pay your April rent payment, and if you don't pay your rent until April the 3rd, that amount is a resource on April the 1st. And the other situation would be for a non-qualified disability expense. Okay. Now, what is a qualified disability expense for housing? We have a definition and regulation for other SSI purposes. Qualified disability expense for housing is mortgage payments, including property insurance, real property taxes, rent, heating, fuel, gas, electricity, water, sewer, and garbage removal. So any of those amounts that are paid for payment of those expenses that are retained beyond the month of withdrawal could be a countable resource for SSI. Now, as I said, that also, if you took out money that you originally planned to use for a qualified disability expense, and then something comes up where you actually use it for housing related purposes or an expense that's not a qualified disability expense, we count that as a resource either the first of the month that you spent it or the month your intent to use that for a qualified disability expense changed. And we'll cover an example of this in a couple minutes. I think the example will make this a little clearer. Okay, now I'm going to run through examples of distributions from ABLE accounts and how they're used, and then we'll go over how they impact the individual's SSI eligibility. Okay, the first example is a non-housing related qualified disability expense. So Eric takes a distribution of $500 from his ABLE account in June to pay for his health-related qualified disability expense. His bill isn't due until September, so he deposits that amount into his checking account. The distribution is not income to Eric in the month of June. So he still maintains his ABLE account at all times, and the distribution is unspent, and he keeps it identifiable in his checking account, but then pays his bill, his medical bill, in September. So we exclude that $500 from his resource computation in July, August, and September. So it's not income in June, and it's not a resource in July, August, and September. So that $500 doesn't impact his eligibility for SSI at all. Okay, the second example is a housing-related qualified disability expense. So Amy takes a distribution of $500 from her ABLE account in May to pay her rent in June. She deposits that into her checking account in May, and then she withdraws $500 in cash to pay her landlord on June the 3rd. So this distribution, so it's a housing-related qualified disability expense. It's not counted as income in May when she takes it out, but since she still has that in her possession on June the 1st, that $500 is a countable resource for the month of June. Okay, another example. Now here's the one for a previously excluded distribution that's used for a non-qualified disability expense. So Sam takes out $25,000 from his ABLE account to modify a specially equipped van in May. He puts down a $10,000 deposit to the shop that's doing the equipment modification. And while he's waiting for his delivery of that van, he goes to his local casino in July and he loses $1,000 gambling. So the $1,000 that he lost from gambling is a countable resource in July, the month where he spent it. That's because the purpose of that distribution went from being a qualified disability expense to a non-qualified disability expense in the month of July. So he took it out in May, used it in July, so he has a $1,000 countable resource in July. Now, that doesn't have any impact on the other $14,000 that he's still holding to pay the balance of the work on his specially equipped van. So as long as he still intends to use that to pay for the specially equipped van, that other $14,000 remains an excluded resource for SSI purposes because it's a qualified disability expense. Another situation, the distribution that was originally intended for a qualified disability expense that's used for a housing-related qualified disability expense. So in June, Jennifer takes a $7,000 distribution from her ABLE account to pay her college tuition, which is a qualified disability expense. Her tuition payment is due in September. So in August, she has to make a $750 advance rent payment to her landlord for her apartment in college. So since she used some of that distribution to make a payment for a housing-related qualified disability expense, that $750 that she used to pay the rent becomes a countable resource in August because she took the withdrawal in June, and this is in a later month. She uses it to pay a housing-related disability expense in August. So we'll count that $750 as a resource in August. Now, the other $6,250 she still has that she was going to use to pay tuition is still an excludable resource as long as she still intends to pay her tuition with that. Now, what about items that are purchased with funds from an ABLE account? Okay, you take withdrawal from an ABLE account, you want to buy something with it. What about the item you buy? Most items that you purchase with an ABLE account, if they're going to be qualified disability expenses, will be excluded resources for SSI. So for example, if you purchase a home, put a down payment on a home, purchase an automobile, household goods and personal effects, any items required by an individual's physical or mental impairment, burial contracts and spaces up to a certain limit, and property used for self-support, for example, tools that you use at your job. Any of those items fall under regular SSI resource exclusions, so they should not impact anybody's eligibility if you use ABLE funds to purchase those items. State reporting requirements. The ABLE Act requires that the state has to report on a monthly basis to the Commissioner of Social Security in a manner specified by the Commissioner statements of relevant distributions and account balances of ABLE accounts. That means anybody who opens an ABLE account, the state is going to report to the Commissioner of Social Security what your first of the month ABLE account balance is and what distributions you took out of the account in the prior month. Now, how is this going to affect you? First, we'll look at the information that the state's going to provide to Social Security. It'll be the name of the account beneficiary, their Social Security number, their date of birth. If there's another individual with signature authority over the account, the name of that person, the account number, the date the account is opened, and if the account was closed, when that was closed, what is the first of the month balance in the account, the date of any distributions in the reporting period, what the distribution amount was, and the name of the state program that's doing the reporting. Okay, so how is Social Security going to use the information provided by the state? Well, first, We will follow all of our due process procedures required under the law, and we'll verify the reported data with the recipient before we take an adverse action against the individual, for example, to put them in suspense status. So for SSI recipients, Social Security will use that information to compute the resource balance and determine if the amount is over $100,000, if the individual should be put into a period of suspension. If you're a Title II beneficiary, Social Security will not use the reported data. Or if you have your ABLE account because you've used the disability certification process, Social Security will not use that data. All of that will just be deleted. So Social Security will only use the reported data from the state in determining eligibility for SSI recipients. So currently, we're enhancing our systems to receive the state reports. We are working on data exchange agreements that will be established with all the states that have open ABLE accounts. We're expecting to do this during the summer of 2017, and we're expecting the states to start sending us information about open ABLE accounts during the fall of 2017. Okay, as far as public information, Social Security is developing a public ABLE webpage that will include information about eligibility requirements and include most of the information that I covered on the webinar today. We're drafting some frequently asked questions, and those will be posted to the webpage. We currently have instructions on ABLE accounts for our field offices, and they are available to the public at ssa.gov on the internet. Our instructional manual is called the Program Operations Manual System, or the acronym is POMS for short. The section that you would want to look for is SI for the SSI program, 01130.740, and it's titled Achieving a Better Life Experience, ABLE Accounts. So that includes all of our instructions for our field offices to follow if someone comes in and tells them, I have an ABLE account now. And we update these instructions as new processes come online. So our next steps, we're going to finalize our computer matching agreements. We're doing our internal systems development to be able to do the data exchange with the states. We talk to other federal agencies to make sure that we're implementing, particularly we talk to the Department of Treasury and the Internal Revenue Service because they are the federal agencies who have the lead on ABLE accounts. And we make sure that what we're doing is coordinated with their efforts. We're also working with the state ABLE programs on the data exchange and process in order to get this data exchange program up and running, and to find out what the state, what states come online, when they start taking ABLE applications, and additionally, what their state requirements are. Okay, and now I will turn it back to John for some questions.
Wonderful, Ken. Thank you so much for that detailed explanation of ABLE accounts and how Social Security looks at them. There are some questions we have, and I'll start with one. What happens to the funds in an ABLE account if the individual with the disability passes away? This is a great question. I'll take it, Ken. We often get this question, and right now on our website, if you scroll down to our news section, you can click on news, and it'll take you to a more detailed explanation that we just posted, but it just depends on the individual if they're receiving Medicaid benefits or not. If the person was not receiving Medicaid benefits, then the funds in the account will be included in the beneficiary's gross estate for federal tax purposes. If the individual or the account owner, the person with the disability, was receiving Medicaid benefits, the state may only request reimbursement for Medicaid benefits paid since the establishment of the ABLE United account. So only for those Medicaid services after the ABLE United account was established could Medicaid make a claim on that. Also, outstanding qualified disability expenses for the individual could be paid first, including funeral and burial. So that's important to know. why, if you do have a Medicaid, just to be aware of that. And remember, the state is not it's a creditor on an Able United account and not a beneficiary. So the state wouldn't automatically receive funds on an Able account. They would have to make a claim. One of the questions I've received here, Ken, is can you explain Social Security disability insurance limits? Are there limits to that, or when it comes to Able accounts?
No, Social Security disability benefits under Title II, an ABLE account has no impact on an individual's eligibility for that. They can become eligible for an ABLE account because they're receiving Social Security disability benefits, but an ABLE account would not impact their eligibility. It's only supplemental security income disability benefits.
That's a great point, Ken. And the bulk of his presentation dealt specifically for those individuals receiving supplemental security income, not SSDI.
Right.
Another question we received is, what kind of receipt or documentation is Social Security looking for to prove that my expenses are for a qualified disability expense?
Okay. If you remember from the presentation, distributions are not income for supplemental security income purposes. So we generally will only develop distributions if they're retained into the month following the month of distribution. So if you get a distribution in March and still have it in April, we'll develop that. If you receive it in March and spend it in March, we won't be developing those distributions. We'll want to see evidence of the amount of the distribution, the date of the distribution, and who it was paid to. Now, once the state data exchange comes up, we'll be getting that information from the state, but we may want to see some additional evidence beyond those. Now, we will accept an allegation, and that is the same requirement that the IRS is using. We'll accept an allegation from the account holder that the purpose was either a qualified disability expense for housing, or a non-qualified disability expense. That is, unless we have evidence to the contrary, and there's some reason to doubt the individual's allegation, that's good enough.
Great, Ken. Thanks for explaining that. A question I have here is, will a rep payee for SSI or SSA be able to set up an ABLE account for individuals? And currently, the way the regs have been written and what's in statute is it has to be somebody that has a legal authority to do that on behalf of the person, and that would be somebody like a parent, a legal guardian, or someone that has a power of attorney that gives them direction to open the ABLE account on their behalf, or a power of attorney over their finances. I don't believe at this time a rep payee would. That would be sufficient to be an authorized individual on the behalf.
Well, we are working on that, John, and we're looking at the possibility of a representative payee using an ABLE account to hold conserved funds. That is, funds beyond what they need for current living expenses. They may be able to keep those in an ABLE account. What they won't be able to use an ABLE account for is somebody has a requirement they open a dedicated account for certain underpayments. They won't be able to use that as a dedicated account, but a rep payee may be able to use it as to keep conserved funds.
Correct. That's
so
great.
Those instructions related to the rep payee may be forthcoming.
Great. One of the questions I received here is, what happens if I open my Able United account and move out of the state while being impacted? The great news is for Able United, you only have to be a resident at time of application. If you were to move the next day, you could take the Able United account with you. It is an all online process. Another question I have here is, can I go to my bank to open it? Currently, most all the ABLE programs, from my knowledge, it's all online. So Able United, you would go to ableunited.com in order to open that account. Another question I have here is, if I'm purchasing eyeglasses considered as an asset, is that counted towards my $2,000 SSI resource limit?
Are the eyeglasses considered toward the resource limit? No, they would be excluded as personal effects, or you need glasses because of for a medical purpose. So those are not counted toward the resource limit.
Great. Um, Looking at some additional questions here. When opening the account, is the documentation for legal guardianship or power of attorney needed to be uploaded at that time? That's a good question. At this time, no. Able United does not require you to upload that documentation, but we do require you to have that documentation in case the IRS or the Able United program does ask for that. At this time, we currently are not collecting those. That's a good question. Look at some other questions here. Do you know if residential providers can open an ABLE account for clients living in a waiver, developmental disability group home, or an ICF-DD long-term care facility? That question, once again, it goes to if the individual is competent and can open their own ABLE account, someone can help them through that process. But when it comes to an account administration role, where you actually are managing the day-to-day actions on that account on behalf of the individual with the disability, it would go back to somebody that has that authorized legal ability, whether it be a parent, legal guardian, or a power of attorney. Another question is, can I have multiple ABLE accounts? The way it is written, you can only have one Able United account nationwide. From my understanding, and Ken, you could correct me on this if I'm wrong, if an individual, let's say, does open another ABLE account, as an Able United program would not be aware. However, Social Security could be made aware, and so would the IRS. And I believe the assets in that other ABLE account would count as a complete resource like a savings account would.
Right. Only the first ABLE account can be excluded from resources. If you open a second account, that would not be considered an ABLE account, and it would be countable. The only situation you could have two ABLE accounts is if, for example, you move from one state to another and you wanted to roll your account over from one ABLE program to another. You could open the account in the new state for the purposes of rolling your account over, but then you have to close the account in the old state. And I believe you've got 60 days to do that.
That is correct. That is correct.
Right.
Good point. Question: what happens to my ABLE account if I no longer qualify for Social Security?
Okay. Well, for Social Security, if you no longer qualify for an ABLE account, I'm assuming because you're no longer disabled, then it really becomes a non-issue for SSA, because if you're no longer disabled, then you're no longer eligible for benefits, and we no longer need that information about you because we're not paying you benefits.
Correct. Another question I have: can an individual, say a parent or a guardian, lives outside the state of Florida, but the person with the disability lives in the state of Florida, can I open an Able United account? Yes, as long as you meet the individual with the disability meets the eligibility requirements, and they live or reside in the state of Florida at the time of application, then a parent, a guardian, or that power of attorney can open an account, from New Mexico. It's all online. So as long as just the person with the disability, not necessarily the account administrator, has to reside in Florida, just that person with the disability does. Another question I have is if a financial advisor can assist a client with setting an account by explaining the differences in allocations and making recommendations based on their risk tolerance, could I potentially be liable if the account does not do well? That's a good question. I'm not a legal entity to answer that question. The great thing is with our ableunited.website, you can actually go on there and see the various options that we have without actually going into the account to kind of see the different risk tolerances. So I think that would probably be a better way to do it than actually, if you're a financial advisor, that's between you and the client. One more question I have here, and then we'll wrap it up. For SSI recipients, what kind of expenses will Social Security consider non-qualified disability expenses?
So at this point, I can say it really depends on the circumstances. Since qualified disability expenses have to be related to your blindness or disability, um, things like a family trip to Disney World could be a little difficult to justify as related to your blindness or disability. And also, entertainment is not listed in the statute or the IRS regulations as a qualified disability expense. That being said, we don't have a definite list of what is a qualified disability expense, but I can say that gambling expenses are a non-qualified disability expense. But the thing to remember is a non-qualified disability expense distribution only counts for SSI purposes if it's retained into the following month. So for SSI purposes, if you withdraw it and spend it in the same month, it doesn't matter. It may matter for the Internal Revenue Service and your tax liability.
Correct, and that's a good point to also know, is that the Internal Revenue Service will also be receiving on an annual basis somebody's account information, including the total amount of withdrawals, any gains on the account, and that will be sent to them in two various forms. One's a 1099 QA that kind of highlights the person's account and any withdrawals they had, and then a 5498 QA will give them IRS information on who established the account and what kind of categorization of the disability was there. That's about all the time we have for questions. We will reach out to those individually if we did not answer your question. I know there was quite a few questions we weren't able to get to, so we'll reach back out to you to answer those. For more information or to connect with Able United, you can visit our website, www.ableunited.com. You can also contact our customer service via email, customerservice@ableunited.com, or call us on the phone, 1-888-524-ABLE or 1-888-524-2253. Like us on Facebook, facebook.com/AbleUnited, and you can also ask questions there as well if you would like. Following at the end of this webinar, there is a quick one-question survey. I would greatly appreciate if you could take the time. Shouldn't take just one question. If you could fill that out, that would help us to better serve you. I want to thank you all for attending today's webinar, Able United and Government Benefits. And I especially wanted to thank Kim Brown from the Social Security Administration. We greatly appreciate your time today for taking the time to present.
My pleasure, and happy to be with you.
Wonderful. And remember, with Able United, it makes it possible to save for a better life experience. Everybody have a great rest of the afternoon. Thank you.